knowledge. Our first talk will be about summary statistical soundness and post-quantum security and SNARKs. It's a work by Yal Tamankalai, Vinod Vaikunathan, and Rachel Zhang, and Rachel will give the talk.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So today I'll be talking about summary statistical soundness, post-quantum security, and SNARKs. Because this talk is only 5 minutes, we'll only talk about the last two. So let's actually start with the last one. So let's talk about SNARKs. So SNARK is a succinct non-interactive argument. The idea is that a prover wants to convince a verifier that some statement X in a language, and she does this by sending a short certificate pi for this fact. You want correctness to hold and soundness to hold against computationally bounded cheating provers, but you also want additional property called succinctness, which is that if the computation takes time t to do, then verifying it should take time way less than t. So as I kind of talked about earlier today, a lot of prior work on constructing SNARKs. So SNARKs for MP have been constructed under really strong assumptions, such as a random oracle model or knowledge assumptions. In the last 7 years or so, there's been work constructing SNARKs for deterministic languages. So for P, there's been SNARKs constructed under sequential IO or bilinear groups. Ideally, though, we want a SNARK that is like post-quantum secure. And so ideally, you want a SNARK under LWE, for instance. So in a recent work, there's been SNARKs for bound and depth computation constructed under conventional LWE. And in concurrent work by Chaudhary, Jain, and Jin, they constructed SNARKs for batch MP and P from LWE. So in this work, we're going to look at this connection between SNARKs for batch MP and SNARKs for P. So our first result is that we can get a SNARK for any language that has a computational non-signaling PCP, assuming the existence of a SNARK for batch MP. So when I say language that has computational non-signaling PCP, I mean language of classes of languages such as P and TSP, which is time T and space S languages, not like languages time T and space S computations that can be done non-deterministically. And there's possibly other classes of languages that have this property. But for now, these are the classes we know. And the second result, that seems kind of unrelated for now, is that we show that Killian's protocol, which is a short 4-round succinct argument, instantiated with a computation non-signaling PCP and parallel SSB hash families, is post-quantum sound. And this gives us a post-quantum succinct argument for the aforementioned classes, so P, NTSP, etc. So there's also been a recent work by Chiesa, Ma, Spooner, and Diendry that shows that Killian is post-quantum sound for any PCP using SSB hash functions, but they do this using advanced quantum techniques. So the benefit of our construction or our proof is that it'll be very simple to understand. You don't need to use all these fancy running quantum techniques. You can understand it just by, if you don't know any quantum factor at all. So let me tell you about, both these results are going to have the same overarching idea behind them. So let me tell you what it is now. So we're going to combine two protocols. So here's the first one. The first is a BMW paradigm. It's a privately verifiable 2-round protocol. And so here's how it works. So the verifier is going to compute a set of PCP queries, as well as some public and secret keys for FHE or pure scheme. He's going to send encrypted queries in the public keys to the prover and keeps the secret keys as a trapdoor for himself. The prover is going to generate the PCP pi, and she's going to compute under the hood using the FHE scheme the answers to the PCP queries and send them to the verifier. Now the verifier can take this trapdoor that he has kept in his head, invert all these encrypted answers and verify the PCP queries. So the question is for which PCPs is this paradigm sound? And it's known that in general, it's probably not sound for any given PCP unless MP is not actually that hard. But it is known to be sound if the PCP has a property known as computation non-signaling. So for this talk, when we say computation non-signaling PCP, which just means that the BMW's approach paradigm is secure. Okay, so the second protocol I want to go over is the Killian protocol. So this is a publicly verifiable 4-round succinct argument. And the way this works is that the verifier is going to give the prover a hash function, which the prover is going to use to commit to the PCP pi. And so then she sends the commitment route to the verifier. Now the verifier is going to ask the prover for a random PCP query. And the prover will have to generate answers as well as these openings, which are just openings which are just basically proofs that the answers are consistent with the original commitment. And it's to the verifier, who then check the answers along with the fact that these openings are actually correct. And so our main the thing we noticed in this work is that the first two rounds look a lot like an instantiation of the BMW paradigm. So in particular, if we use a computation non-signaling PCP and some sort of like locally openable like pure scheme, then the first two rounds are actually a sound instantiation of BMW. So it's like a KRR protocol. Okay, and so in particular, and so these like locally openable pure schemes are known to exist, are known as SSBs, so more specifically binding hash functions, and they're known to exist assuming RWE. So now Kilian's protocol looks as follows. The verifier can send over encrypted queries, and the prover is going to respond with these encrypted answers. And now the key point is that if the verifier asks the prover for the queries that are encrypted in the original message, then because the prover has like committed to the answers already in the commitment, then like, she can't generate any accepting answers and openings, like they don't exist. So in particular, an all-powerful adversary cannot find accepting answers and openings. So that's our main observation. So there's like two consequences, what I said earlier, the two results. So the first is that we want to construct a snark. And so the first two rounds, like you can put the first round as like the CRS, right? And so the second message from the prover to the verifier is like, one round. So if we just get rid of the last two rounds of Kilian protocol, then we would have a snark. And so the question is, how do you do this? And so we just noticed that like, if the prover could convince the verifier that for all possible queries Q, there exists these answers and openings, then we would be done. So we're going to do exactly that. She's going to send over a snark for the fact that for all queries, there are these accepting answers and openings. And so we have a snark. So yay, okay. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say about that. Let's talk about, and this is like a batch NP statement. So yeah, so you need that snark for batch NP. Cool, and so the second thing I want to talk about is post-quantum security. So we start again with the Kilian protocol. And so if you want to argue soundness of this Kilian protocol instantiated with, this non-signaling PCP and SSB hash functions, what you might do is you would say, okay, look, if the third message is Q star, then the protocol sound, like, the verifier is going to reject. Okay, well, if you send over random Q, well, you don't know what was in the first message. It could have been Q, it could have been Q star, who knows, right? So by indistinguishability, it must still be sound. So that's what we call straight line proof of soundness, which is that, so the straight line reduction is one that interacts with the cheating prover exactly once, then it rewind and uses that to break some assumption. And we show that any argument system that's proven sound via straight line reduction is also post-quantum sound, because it doesn't use any like weird like classical techniques that don't hold quantum adversaries. And you have to assume that the underlying assumption is also a straight line post-quantum sound. This is true for Kilian. So we have as a corollary that Kilian was a computation non-signaling PCP, and a parallel SSB hash function is post-quantum sound. Yeah, so this is my summary page, but I said everything in the last like 2 minutes, so I'll say it again. Thank you.
One quick question for me. So PCBs generally have this like probabilistic aspect that if the statement is wrong, there's like many queries where you'll catch it. But here you're asking all the queries in the set Q. Does that let you do something easier than PCP, or does it give you an extra power?
I think I understood the question.
Well, here in the protocol, like you're actually showing, you're using the batch NP to show that every possible query would answer correctly, not just like most of them would.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you don't need like this probabilistic aspect of PCP where like most things are correct, right? Does that kind of let you do something a little easier, like not use the full power of PCP?
I don't know. That's a really good question. I've not thought about that, so I have no idea.
Okay. Thank you. Second speaker system. Stop share. Oh, it has to open in the.
Yeah, so let's should we
And then I share.
to present?
Oh, right here.
And to present, we have to click on those three points. Yes.
Excellent. All right, our second talk will be on black box impossibility of obtaining 2-round weak zero knowledge and strong WI from polynomial hardness by Susumu Kiyoshima.
All right, so it is working. All right, so hello everyone. All right, so in this work, we study weak zero knowledge and strong WI, which are both prove a privacy notion of interactive proof and argument, such that first, they are weaker than zero knowledge, so we can avoid the several known impossibility of zero knowledge. And second, they are stronger than WI, so they are meaningful even in some application where standard WI is useless. So in more detail, first, weak zero knowledge is defined by switching the order of quantifier in the definition of zero knowledge. So specifically, weak zero knowledge only requires that for any verifier and for any distinguisher, there exists a simulator such that the real and simulation are indistinguishable. So the difference from standard zero knowledge is that now the simulator is allowed to depend on the distinguisher. So clearly, weak zero knowledge is a very natural weakening of zero knowledge. So it is interesting theoretically. And in addition, it is known that the weak zero knowledge is useful when it is used as building block in some other larger protocols. And next, strong WI is defined by requiring that the proofs about the indistinguishable statement are also indistinguishable. So specifically, it is required that for any two distribution over a statement witness pair, if two statements chosen from these distributions are indistinguishable, then they remain indistinguishable even when proof about them are given to the verifier. So a key difference from a standard WI is that strong WI is meaningful even for unique witness relation. So for example, strong WI can be used to prove a statement about the statistically binding commitment. And in previous work, it has been shown that the 2-round weak zero knowledge and the strong WI can be obtained both in the derivative setting and the standard non-derivative setting. And here, standard non-derivative setting means that the statement is fixed at the beginning of the protocol, whereas derivative setting means that the statement is chosen by the prover in the last round of the protocol. And this positive result about 2-round construction are of course really great, but the major weak point about them is that currently all of them are based on super polynomial hard assumptions, such as assumption against the sub-exponential time adversary. So in this work, we study whether it is impossible to obtain 2-round weak zero knowledge and strong WI and the standard polynomial hard assumption when we prove security using standard techniques. And here, standard assumption and the standard techniques are formalized by using the notion of falsifier assumption and the black box reduction, respectively. And if you're not familiar with these two notions, you can just think that the falsifier assumption include any game-based assumptions that are considered standard in cryptography, and the black box reduction include common proof techniques that use adversary as also. Now let me explain our result, and let's start from weak zero knowledge. So first, I note that the classical impossibility of 3-round black box zero knowledge also holds for weak zero knowledge in the standard non-derivative setting. And in this work, we show that the 2-round weak zero knowledge in the derivative setting is impossible if soundness is proved by black box reduction and the falsifier polynomial hard assumptions. And I note that this result holds even when non-black box techniques are used in the proof of weak zero knowledge. So now, next, let's go to strong WI. And first, we showed that the 2-round strong WI in the standard non-derivative setting is impossible if strong WI is proved by black box reduction and the falsifier assumption, I mean. And next, we show that the 2-round strong WI in the derivative setting is also impossible if either strong WI is proved by black box reduction, and we consider protocols that have public verifiability, or both strong WI and soundness are proved by black box reduction. And here I know that this result actually requires a reduction for strong black box in a strong sense. Essentially, we require that they are black box not only about the cheating verifier, but also about the distribution of the statement. But this is a very natural property, and all the prior black box reduction for strong WIs indeed satisfy this property. So in summary, our result implies that the non-black box technique is necessary for both weak zero knowledge and strong WI in both delayed setting and standard non-delayed setting. And the clear open question is, of course, to obtain two round with zero knowledge, strong WI, and the polymer hardness by using non-black box techniques. And this concludes my talk. So thank you very much.
Questions? Thanks. And so our next talk will be an online talk. You have to stop sharing. Miguel, are you online?
Yes. Sorry, I didn't know.
Can you
I was not sure.
share your screen?
Yes. Next up to Can you see it?
Yes. Yes. All right, excellent. So our next talk will be on acyclicity programming for Sigma protocols by Masa Abe, Ambrosia, Bogdanov, Okubo, and Alan Rosen. And Miguel will give the talk.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. So in this work, we present a new technique for combining Sigma protocols. So I'm going to start briefly describing what a Sigma protocol is. Basically, it's a three-move protocol that can be used to obtain very efficient zero-knowledge proof systems. Or in the first round, the prover creates a certain message called A that will be produced by using some randomness. Then the verifier will sample a random challenge, E, uniformly from a big set of challenges. And finally, the prover will respond with a valued set, which the verifier may accept or reject. The Sigma protocol is specified by these three algorithms, C, Z, and V, as well as a fourth algorithm, S, which stands for simulator, that produces or simulates valid transcripts without the witness when given the challenge in advance. So the properties that a Sigma protocol must satisfy are weaker than those of a zero-knowledge proof system, and this makes them much easier to analyze and build. However, without much effort, they can be transformed into actual zero-knowledge proof systems. So one way to do so is to use the Fiat-Shermer heuristic, which consists of replacing the verifier by a hash function. And if this hash function is modeled as a programmable random oracle, then the resulting protocol is a non-interactive zero-knowledge argument of knowledge. So it's a natural question to ask whether it is possible to compose several Sigma protocols. And the CDS94 composition technique provides very good tools to do so by manipulating the challenge string E. But in this work, we study a different composition technique known as sequential composition, which it's essentially a generalization of the Fiat-Shermer heuristic. This technique allows us to combine two Sigma protocols in disjunction by applying the Fiat-Shermer heuristic in a crossed way among the transcripts. That is, challenge E2 will be computed as the hash of A1, and challenge E1 will be computed as the hash of A2. In particular, knowing one witness is enough to efficiently produce a valid proof. So suppose that the prover only knows a witness W1 for the first statement X1. The prover can compute the first message A1 normally, and this will unlock the value of E2, the second challenge, from which the prover can now simulate the second transcript without the witness. And this will set the value for E1. So now the prover can finish the first transcript. Observe that this technique can be generalized to cycles of other length, not just two. So for example, we could join three Sigma protocols in disjunction with the following challenge dependencies. And this approach leads to ring signature schemes that can be used to combine Schnorr and RSA signatures, one of the main applications mentioned in the work by Abe, Okubo, and Suzuki. Furthermore, this technique has been recently revisited and shown to be useful for proving enforceability in the non-programmable random model. So what do we do in this work? Well, in this work, the work I'm presenting, we extend this technique of composition of Sigma protocols and consider more general structures than just a circle. So for example, say we have 4 Sigma protocols, each of them represented by a node in the following graph, where the arrows represent challenge dependencies. So for example, given that node 3 has incoming arrows from node 1 and node 4, then the third challenge, which is the challenge corresponding to the transcript of Sigma protocol 3, must be computed as the hash of A1 and A4, the first message of the first transcript and the first message of the fourth transcript. It turns out that doing so will give us a proving system for a compose statement of the Sigma protocol predicates. But what is that compose statement? Well, that's what we study in this paper. So we provide mechanisms to understand the predicate induced by a certain graph and vice versa. So we study how to build a graph that captures a predicate of our choice. Furthermore, we show that this technique can capture any predicate that can be efficiently expressed as what we call an acyclicity program. So acyclicity programming is a new model of computation that we introduced in this work. And essentially, we can say that a monotone acyclicity program is just a directed graph whose nodes are labeled by variables. And the program accepts a set of variables, S, if the graph resulting from removing all nodes associated to variables in S contains no cycles. One of the things that we show in this paper is that acyclicity programming is polynomially equivalent to branching programs. And this makes our new composition technique incomparable to the CDS94 one, because there exist languages that can be efficiently described by acyclicity programs, but whose monotone span program representation is superpolynomial, and vice versa. Monotone span programs is basically the class of predicates that CDS94 can handle. This diagram shows polynomial time simulatability relations among different predicate representations. So we can say that both methods, CDS94 and our new technique, are orthogonal in terms of complexity, and they complement each other. However, I would like to say that there is a major difference, which is that CDS94 preserves the Sigma protocol structure, while our composition leads inherently to a non-interactive proof system, given that we use the Fia-Sherman heuristic, and therefore we also require the random oracle model. Okay, so I would also like to mention another technique that we propose in this work, which allows us to compose Sigma protocols on predicates expressed as monotone circuits. And we refer to the paper for more details, but we encourage you to have a look because we believe this is a very powerful composition technique, which requires at the cost of having a computational assumption, but it's still very interesting in my opinion. So just to finish, let me say again that what we do in this work is to study a novel technique for combining Sigma protocols into non-interactive zero-knowledge proof systems that can be proven in the programmable random oracle model. And our new technique allows us to combine Sigma protocols and the predicate expressed in a new model of computation, which is acyclicity programming, that is not comparable to existing techniques. So thank you very much for your attention.
Questions from the audience or online? All right, great. Let's thank Miguel again.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is live. go. Great. So our next talk will be on statistical ZAPs from group-based assumptions. It is by Jeffrey Kata, Suchi Katsumata, Elahe Sadagi, and Bogdan Ursu, and Elahe will give the talk.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you. So first, I want to recall the definition of ZAP protocols to make sure that everyone here knows what we're talking about. Okay. So a ZAP protocol is similar to a non-interactive zero-knowledge protocol with some slight differences. A ZAP protocol is a two-message protocol in the plain model. So there is no trusted setup to generate the CRS here for us. The protocol involves two parties, a prover and verifier, and the prover, after receiving a message from the verifier, wants to prove that some statement like X is in some language like L. The protocol has three main properties, which the first two is completeness and soundness, and they're similar to the definition in the non-interactive zero-knowledge protocols. And the last one is a relaxation of the zero-knowledge property, which is called witness indistinguishability, which says that if there exist two witnesses like W0 and W1 for the same statement X, the verifier should not be able to distinguish between two words that in one prover uses W0 to produce the proof, and in the other prover uses W1 to produce the proof. There are two types of ZAP protocols. First is computational ZAP proofs, which we have statistical soundness and computational witness indistinguishability in them. And the other is statistical ZAP arguments, which we have computational soundness and statistical witness indistinguishability in them. The reason that we care about the statistical ZAP arguments in particular is that soundness is some online security notion, which means that if this is the time period that the proof is being generated in the protocol, the adversary wants to attack soundness during this period of time. And after the proof is being generated, we don't care about soundness anymore. But witness indistinguishability is the property that we want it to be everlasting, because the adversary wants to attack it even after the proof is being generated. So between these two properties, we want witness indistinguishability to be statistical. There has been constructions of computational ZAP proofs from different assumptions, such as trapdoor permutations, bilinear maps, IO or LWE. And from recent work, there has been a construction of statistical ZAP arguments based on quasi-polynomial hardness of LWE. But the question of can we have statistical ZAP arguments from assumptions other than LWE remains open. In our work, we introduced a framework for constructing statistical ZAPs for MP, and we gave two instantiations of statistical ZAPs, one in pairing groups based on explicit hardness of DDH and kernel Diffie-Hellman assumption, and other in pairing free groups based on explicit hardness of DDH and a strong one-way KDM security of L-Gamal encryption. And in a concurrent and independent work, there has been a construction of a statistical ZAP arguments based on sub-exponential hardness of DDH in pairing free groups, which we heard a little about it from an Avalier type by Abhishek Jain. So to give you the idea of our work, we want to start with some unconditional music in the hidden bits model and get a statistical ZAP for MP in the plain model from it. And in order to make this transformation, we needed some kind of hidden bits generator, which we call it interactive hidden bits generator in our paper. Our starting point was some previous construction of LPWW, and in their work, they get a dual mode designated verifier music in the CRS model from a music in the hidden bits model by using a dual mode designated verifier hidden bits generator. In order to use their work and in the ZAP setting, we wanted to maintain the dual mode property of the hidden bits generator, and we wanted to do it in a way to be publicly verifiable instead of the designated verifier setting. So we needed to be a little creative here. The idea to maintain the dual mode property of the hidden bits generator was to first let the verifier sample the CRS, which is a common approach, and then let the prover to tweak the CRS to protect itself from a malicious verifier. And we needed to come up with some well-chosen tweak here. And in order to make the construction publicly verifiable, we used a statistical zap for some simple language. And by combining these ideas, we were able to get a statistical zap for MP in the plain model from an unconditional music in the hidden bits model. For more details, I refer to the actual paper. I want to finish my talk with some open problems in this area. So first is that can we have constructions of a statistical zap arguments only from search assumptions? Our construction relied on DDH. So one possible question can be, can we relax DDH to CDH? Another question that can come to mind is that can we have constructions of zaps in general from assumptions that is not known to imply PKA? I would be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Do you have a question? Actually, I have a question. So what do you mean by explicit hardness of DDH? Is that different than sub-exponential hardness?
So by explicit hardness, I mean that we require an explicit bound for the advantage of the PPT adversary against the assumption.
Is it exponential?
It's super polynomial. Thank you.
Thank you. It should be PowerPoint. Okay. This one, right? Right, great. So our last talk will be on generalized proofs of knowledge with fully dynamic setup by Christian Badacher, Daniel Jose, and Uli Mar, and Daniel will give the talk.
Okay, so welcome everybody to my talk. So this is generalized proof of knowledge with fully dynamic setup, which is joint work with Christian Badacher and Uli Mar. Okay, so as you probably all know, proof of knowledge is one of the most influential abstraction in cryptography, which has tons of applications. So in a proof of knowledge, there's some kind of relation, there's a prover that has a witness for that relation and wants to convince the verifier that he knows a witness. And typically it's supposed to be zero knowledge. So the prover doesn't just want to reveal the witness, but they run some kind of interactive protocol. Unfortunately, there are applications where this very general notion of proof of knowledge is still not just general enough. And yeah, so let me give some examples. So one of them is, let's say you want to do some password-based authentication protocol where you have a user that has a username and a password that wants to log into some server. So essentially the user wants to prove to the server that they know their password. Another example would be a so-called proof of ownership. There you have a server with which stores a bunch of files, and the user wants to prove to the server that they know the content of one of those files, hopefully in a much more efficient way than just uploading the whole file to the server. So again, essentially the prover wants to prove that they know the content of the file. Yet, for neither of the two applications, we can formalize this using the standard proof of knowledge abstraction because it just doesn't seem to be generic enough. Instead, for both topics,
entropy-based security definition, which seem to be fairly tailor-made to the particular application, have emerged. And indeed, there's actually quite a long list of generalizations of proof of knowledge that tackle various aspects. For instance, in a proof of knowledge, we have a very static statement and witness, which are just bit strings that are assumed to be given to the parties. But in many applications, it seems like you have just two parties that approach each other. They first need to sort of talk to each other and then see what kind of statement they actually want to prove. Another thing is that in the standard proof of knowledge notion, the relation is assumed to be fixed and known beforehand, so we can build a protocol for a specific relation, which is also not always the case. Then third, there could be setup, which is not something accounted for in proof of knowledge. And in particular, in this work, we're the first one that actually look at setup dependent relations and fully general relations. So previous generalization just looked at like one kind of setup and made proof of knowledge for this setup. So in a bit more detail, in this work, we introduce a generalization notion of proof of knowledge, which encompasses a dynamic setup, a dynamic agreement phase where parties agree first on the statement, then we treat dynamic and fully reactive setups, and we call this notion agree and prove. It unifies essentially all the existing proof of knowledge generalization, and it obviously comes with clear semantics with respect to correctness, soundness, and zero knowledge. In our work, we then apply this framework to two applications. One of them is this proof of ownership, and the other one is two-factor entity authentication, which is actually a generalization of password-based login, where you assume that there's also some kind of abstract hardware token where the user wants to prove that they have access to this token and can interact with it correctly. Finally, in recent work, Vidik and Zhang in Eurocrypt 21 also adapted our framework to the quantum setting and used it there. So just to give you a very high level 2-minute description of our notion, essentially what we do is we split the prover and the verifier both in two phases. We have a so-called agreement phase in which they agree on a statement X, and then they both output the state, and the second phase then actually does the proof, and they output the bit saying whether the proof has been accepted or not. All of those four algorithms interact with general setup, and I should say this is really a UC type general setup that is stateful, that can provide different kind of interfaces to both the prover and the verifier, and so on. Finally, there's also what we call an input generation algorithm that just interacts with the setup beforehand and gives an initial input to both the prover and the verifier. Based on this template, we then define what correctness means. Basically, if an honest prover and an honest verifier interact with each other, they should both agree on the same statement. And then they should also both accept unless their statement was explicitly abort, which could be in case they just don't have a common ground where a proof would be successful. Our notion is also parameterized in what we call an agreement notion that specifies essentially which kind of statements are valid given the two parties' states at the beginning of the protocol. So given their view on the setup and given their auxiliary inputs. This is mainly done to rule out trivial protocols where, for instance, they could just always agree on aborting, or they could always agree on one particular statement for which the proof would be much easier. Then, obviously, because this is proof of knowledge type, generalization of proof of knowledge, we also have a soundness experiment. And there we have a proof relation, which is really just the analogous to the relation of a proof of knowledge. But here it can depend on the setup, and that means we formalize this as a stateless algorithm that can make Oracle invocations to the setup and also gets the statement and the witness. So in this soundness experiment, we run the agreement phase just once. That gives us the statement, and then we say, okay, whenever they Whenever with this statement, the dishonest prover can convince the verifier, then this prover must have known a witness for that particular statement. And we formalize this using an extractor that has black box rewinding access to the second prover. And in addition, it also gets the communication transcript of the first phase, as well as all the setup queries the first phase made. This is mainly made so that we can have more efficient protocol, where if you have a very involved first phase, then you don't need to have a full, maybe not a full proof of knowledge as the second phase, but can do something more efficient. Then there's some technicalities. For instance, we need, because this proof relation is no longer necessarily public, we need to give the extractor access to this. It also needs to have access to the setup functionality from the view of the viewer and so on, but I really refer you to the paper for those details. Finally, I should mention that we obviously then formalize zero knowledge, and actually here we have two versions of zero knowledge for both the prover and the verifier. So whereas in standard proof of knowledge, the verifier has no secret, just the public statement, here, in principle, the verifier can just have secrets as well as the prover. For instance, his view on the setup function could be very different, and he does not want to reveal secret information there. Also, we parameterize our notion in explicit leakage. So if you have a protocol that's maybe not perfectly zero knowledge, but has some kind of well-defined leakage, you can also use our framework to model that. Finally, we consider both programmable and non-programmable setup, and we also show some very limited composability results. So to wrap up, in our work, we introduced this generalization of proof of knowledge. That's the first one that treats fully dynamic setup, dynamic and setup dependent relations, and dynamic statement agreement phase. And we show the usefulness of this work by modeling two applications that previously could not be modeled as a proof of knowledge in our framework. Thank you for your attention.
Questions? Yes, I have a question. Do you have any examples maybe of where kind of standard notions of zero knowledge, proof of knowledge would not suffice, but kind of you need this extra strengthening from the work? You can like actually show something goes wrong.
So one example is, for instance, this password-based authentication. You generally, the relation between the username and their password, or a digest of their password, is just not an NP relation that you can assume to be fixed beforehand. You design the protocol. So instead, and also it's definitely not something that's public. So you don't want that the prover can verify password guesses themselves. So there we really need this. We need that our functionality can model some kind of user database where different parties have different views on it and can interact with it differently.
Thank you. Yeah, questions? All right, thank you.